All right, everybody, welcome to this discussion on Benjamin Franklinstein. I thought that would be a fitting title for this video, since not only was he a monster, but the Stein suffix seems so fitting for him for other reasons. Anyway, as we have seen, the founding fathers of this country were not at all, for the most part anyway, what we've been led to think that they were. The whopping majority of them were outright Freemasons, right? Judeo-Freemasons. But even worse than that, on the presidential level, they all have been part of the Judaic royal bloodline, going back to, England and thus the rest of Europe. The whole kingly bloodline across the board has been Judaic in nature since the time of the Merovingians, the Carolingians. But anyway, and we've seen that, a good many of them were, because of their Judeo-Masonic connections, they were scoundrels, right? They were liars, they were schemers, outright terrorists. But perhaps none of them could compete as far as, being downright evil and corrupt. Perhaps none of them could compete with Mr. Benjamin Franklinstein. He's got a rank as the worst, one of the worst, if not the worst, of the founding fathers. Franklin was born on Milk Street in Boston, Massachusetts, on January 17th, 1706, and was baptized at Old South Meeting House. He was one of 17 children born to Josiah Franklin, and one of 10 born by Josiah's second wife, Abia Fulger, the daughter of Peter Fulger and Mary Morrill, Morrill. Anyway, among Benjamin's siblings were his older brother, James, and his younger sister, that is, Jane. Anyway, Josiah had wanted Ben to attend school with the clergy, but only had enough money to send him to school for, just 2 years. Imagine that. He was hoping he was going to pursue a career in the clergy, maybe because he found him to be of a corrupt enough character that seemed to be the suitable field for him to go into. And I'm not speaking facetiously either. We're going to be looking in a future video at the clergy at that time and just how corrupt they were. We've kind of already seen that, right? Going back to the 17th century, the early colonists that come over here, the ministers like Cotton Mather were scumbags, right? They were cryptos, a good many of them. They were scammers. Well, guess what? Nothing changed on into the 18th century. They were scoundrels as well. And nothing has changed right up into modern times, right? I'm not saying there aren't sincere ministers that are decent people. There are. Who are just as duped as their congregation. But in the grander scheme of things, the big name preachers have almost always, in fact, the bigger the names are, the more chances that they're corrupt scoundrels, right? The big name preachers really, in fact, I will say always, I will definitely say always, the big name preachers have always been corrupt. Can you think of any that haven't been? Can you name one? They've all been corrupt. Some have been seemingly more sincere than others, but no, they've all been corrupt. I mean, my God, look at Billy Graham, right? Probably the biggest well-named known in televangelism history, or just evangelism history in this country. And complete scumbag, right? A lot of people thought, oh, he's so sincere. A sincere scoundrel. Mason, well connected with some of the sleaziest of sleazy scumbag politicians. How do you win the confidence of the sleazebag presidents so that you get invited to the White House for private, meetings, unless you're a sleazy scumbag yourself, right? Well, he was a Mason, so yeah, of course he was going to be welcomed into their confidence and engage in Masonic handshakes, clearly indicating where his loyalties really were, right? Everything else was just rhetoric, just public show, window dressing, public theater. And so, yeah, when you go back to the Revolutionary War period, ministers were corrupt little scoundrels then as well. But like I said, I'll get into that later for another presentation. But, seriously, maybe that's why Franklin's father had aspirations for him to get into the ministry. He probably saw that, oh, yeah, he's got just the right lack of character for that. When I look back at my days as a theology major, I'll tell you, man, I only knew of one other theology student that had any sincere aspirations for getting into the ministry. The rest of them, it was just an easy way to make a fast buck and goof off the rest of the time. And that's how most ministers conduct themselves. When you get to really know them and see behind the scenes how they really work, it's just a way to make an easy living, right? Minimal amount of work. And if you're in the right church, a maximum amount of pay. A lot of ministers get paid quite handsomely. And they can get by doing very, very little work. It's just a business, which is why, not that there's any legitimacy to the whole Christian religion anyway, but my big contention back when I was a Bible dupe is that ministers should never be paid. And there's actually biblical reasons for saying that. But aside from biblical reasons, the whole concept of a minister is supposed to be that you minister to people, you serve them, right? You shouldn't be paid for that. I would have had no problem if the local church provided you a place to live and, bought your groceries, right? You're not getting paid, but because you're dedicating your life to serving that church, it's only fair, it's only proper, and even necessary for them to provide for your housing and whatnot, right? If you're doing it full time, of course, you can't hold a job and do that too, right? As long as you're actually doing the work that's expected of you, and you're not goofing off, yeah, you should be entitled to not pay, but having, your groceries paid for, your housing, your heat, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But once you start actually getting money where you're making a profit now, and you have all this extra cash floating around, that's where the corruption factor runs very high. Again, I'm not even endorsing Christianity at all. The whole thing's a fraud across the board. But I'm just talking about how my thinking went when I was a Christian. I never liked the idea of ministers getting paid. They were turning it into a career, right? A business even. And I saw the powerful corrupting factor of it. And I even argued that, biblically speaking, they shouldn't get paid. Didn't Jesus say, freely you have received, now freely give? He did say that. Yet, Paul came along and said, ministers should get paid twice the wages of an average worker because they're doing a more important work, the Lord's work, So Paul completely turned that around. And that's what modern churches use to justify this little money game, which they use as a mechanism of control to keep ministers in line. Preach what we want you to preach. And they do that too. Oh, yes, they do. Churches are constantly telling ministers to tailor their sermons along certain lines, especially around the theme of tithe paying. I remember as an Adventist preacher, they were always trying to get me to preach about the importance of paying tithe, reminding people, because they wanted more freaking money. Oh, so disgusting. But anyway, I'm getting off the track here. But this is all coming back to my original point. I'm not kidding. Maybe Ben Franklin had the right lack of character for the ministry, and that's why his father wanted him to get into it. I've had people that I went to college with meet up with me here and there over the years, and the first thing they ask me, so how's the ministry? And I'm like, oh, I never got into the ministry. Oh, really? No? What happened? I said, I decided I wanted to earn an honest living instead. And I said it, laughingly, but I wasn't joking. You're not earning an honest living. Most of them aren't even honest. Anyway, back to Ben Franklin here. It turns out that Ben Franklin attended Boston Latin School, but he didn't wind up graduating. Instead, he continued his education on his own with voracious reading. He would devour every book he could get his hands on. Although his parents talked of the church as a career for him, his formal schooling ended when he was just 10 years old, as it turns out. And even though he was, quote, well educated, again, it's something he did on his own. I'll argue that's actually the best education. Unfortunately, you can't get a decent job unless you get the formal education. And most of the time, all you're being pumped with is crap. Looking back years ago, when I went to college in the late 90s, I went a little late in life. Most of it was junk learning, I called it, Just absolute crap that was totally useless for any field that I was hoping to, planning to get into. Even a lot of, when I picked up history and secondary ed as a major, a lot of it was just crap. So I would just memorize it to get a good grade. And then, boom, I would dump learning. I would just dump it right after the test because I'm like, I'm never going to use this. I don't even care to keep this retained in my mind, And that's how it is for the most part with education today. Anything that you get out of it that's actually useful, you could literally condense it all into 1 or 2 semesters. Seriously. The entire 4 years you could finish in half a year or at most a year. 1 year would do it. There's no need to go for 4. Most of those classes have nothing to do with, even remotely with what the field is you want to get into, right? In fact, a lot of them don't have anything to do with anything. They're just general, G suffix classes, we used to call them. Just to fill time and to get those required credits. It's just a game, folks. It's all it is. Just a way to make more money off you, to keep you held there longer, accrue more debt. It's such freaking BS. Especially when you realize that a lot of the jobs now that require you to have a degree shouldn't require you. You didn't need to just 30 somewhat years ago, right? It wasn't until the 90s, the early 90s, that they started requiring you to have a college degree to teach frickin' 5th graders, or for that matter, 1st and 2nd graders. You didn't need any freaking college degree. If you know how to read and add 1 and 1, you can teach 1st and 2nd and 3rd graders, right? It's nonsense. It's nonsense. We have been freaking bamboozled, baby. Bamboozled. And now, of course, it wasn't very long before they made this transition either. First, they required you to get your bachelor's, but now it's your master's as well. How much longer before it's a PhD just to teach 1st graders? And then after that, they'll probably invent another even higher degree when they're not making enough money off you. You'll be 40 years old by the time you're able to get a job, and by then you'll be in such debt that you'll be spending the rest of your life just paying your school off, never mind actually buying a house. I'm not even exaggerating. It's almost at that point now. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Of course it is. And how did it get this way? By design, baby. You'd better believe it. By design. Anyway, Ben Franklin worked for his father for a short time, who made soap and candles for a living. And, well, he did that for about 2 years anyway. And then by the age of 12, he became an apprentice to his brother James, who was a printer, who taught him, the printing trade. And that's what Franklin ultimately, the field he ultimately got into, and where he made quite a bit of money, publishing propaganda. Propaganda, especially for advancing the cause of the Revolutionary War. Anyway, by 3 years later, when Ben was 15, his brother James founded what was called the New England Courant, which was the first truly independent newspaper in any of the colonies. Well, independent on the surface, anyway. When denied the chance to write a letter to the paper for publication, Ben Franklin adopted the pseudonym of Silence Dogood, a supposed middle-aged widow. That was his little handle that he wrote under. Mrs. Dogood's letters were published and became a subject of conversation around town, initially when he first took off with this. Neither James nor the Courant's readers were aware of the ruse. His own brother didn't even know that he was the one. He was sending the letters in, under that title. So his own brother didn't even know who was behind all of this. And then, of course, later on, when he discovered that it was, in fact, his brother, he wasn't very happy with him. There was a falling out between them over this. Franklin was an alleged advocate of free speech from an early age, or again, that's at least the impression he gave. And you can bet he gave that impression so that when he broke off and started his own paper, people would be more likely to buy it and read it, right? Thinking that, oh, he's one of us, he's a good guy, he's for freedom of speech, so we know we're going to get the truth from him. He was no advocate of free speech. He wasn't an advocate of free anything except Freemasonry. Anyway, not too long after this, Ben Franklin's brother was actually jailed for 3 weeks in 1722 for publishing material unflattering to the then governor, at which time the younger brother, Ben, took over the newspaper and had Mrs. Dogood quoting Cato's, from Cato's letters, proclaiming, quote, without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. Again, it was all rhetoric. He wasn't really supportive of these concepts, but by putting them in the paper, he was trying to give the impression that, again, he was, you can trust this paper. He was to be trusted, or Dogood was to be trusted. For saying stuff like this, right? It was just propaganda to lure people in. Franklin left his apprenticeship with his brother, though, without his brother's permission. And in so doing, he created even more division between them than what had already existed. He wound up becoming a fugitive or a runaway, if you will. But by this time, he didn't care I think that was his plan because he learned enough about the printing press now that he realized he could go it alone. And that's what he wound up doing. And he realized that it was pretty easy to manipulate the public, right? All you had to do was profess things like this, that you were all for free speech and free thought. That would lure people in. And once you got them hooked, then you could control their seeming free thought, right? That was his whole intent. That was his whole modus operandi. So at age 17, Franklin took off to Philadelphia to go off on his own now. He already had far-reaching plans. He probably was already in contact with Freemasonry at this point, and they saw in him, someone that, yes, they could make good use of. He doesn't have any conscience, any loyalty, no boundaries, no moral barriers, Yeah, we can make good use of this guy. This is how they operate, folks. They look for people like that who can easily be bought or sold, They'll embrace whatever you want them to do. Yep. So now he took off. He obviously got some, no doubt, he knew how to run a printing press already. So he had the makings for going independent. But he probably also had some backing, too. People that he knew he could count on to help get him set up. He would become independent on his own ultimately, but he needed some capital to begin with, right? You can bet he found some friends that were all too willing to assist him with that. Anyway, when he first arrived in Philadelphia, he worked in several printing shops, across town, but he was never satisfied with any of the jobs that he took on. I think he was just trying to get himself established in the local community, make a name for himself, always having that aim, though, in mind, ultimately to get his own shop. So maybe he didn't have enough connections yet. He still needed to, win some local friends. We can only speculate. We don't know exactly when he developed these connections. But it was in Philadelphia where he really got rooted. And so if he didn't have the connections already before he went there, he certainly got them while he was there. After only a few months, while working in a local printing house, Franklin became convinced by Pennsylvania Governor Sir William Keith to go to London. Well, there you go. How did he establish connections so early in just a few months with Sir William Keith, who encouraged him to go to London, ostensibly to acquire, the equipment that would be necessary for establishing another newspaper in Philadelphia? Why? This is Masonic connections here, guys. It has to be. It has to be. Why would this Pennsylvania governor take an interest in this guy? He's only 17, right? Why would he be so keen not only to take an interest in him, but to actually recommend, hey, and go to London where? Who? What? What's he going to do there? Or how's he going to do that? Unless there was already some connections. Hey, yeah, I know a guy in London. He'll take care of you. He'll give you the funds you need, If he didn't have Masonic connections already, he did by this point. But how much you want to bet? He had to have some kind of connection already. In just a few months' time, he's already talking with the freaking governor? Really? And the governor thought highly enough of him to recommend him to go to England to get some support? And No. This sounds like what Bill Clinton said years ago when he was asked, how did you arise to greatness, if you can call that greatness, in the political world. And he said, well, I learned a long time ago when I was in school. I'll forget my Bill Clinton interpretation. It's more like his scratchy voice. Well, I didn't have sex with that woman. Anyway, he said, I learned a long time ago that if I ever wanted to get anywhere in this world, I needed to befriend the right people. And he said, I forget how he worded it now, but in so many words, that didn't involve politicians, Obviously not. We know what he meant by that, right? People with money, big money. That's who he knew he needed to surround himself with if he wanted to climb the ladder of success. And so his contact with the governor here was probably because he knew the governor was connected with big money. It wasn't the governor himself that was going to get him places. In fact, the governor referred him to someone over in England, right? That's how you can climb the ladder. That's the epicenter right now of Judaic power in the world. They're soon going to be transferring everything here. But right now, the British government is still the main avenue through which they're working. Their British empire that they're controlling. But soon, they intend to transfer things here with the American empire. But in the meantime, until that happens, go over to England. That's the place to be if you really want to go places in this world. And so, yeah, this is why he is rightly said to have been a double agent, right? He was known to be going back and forth between England and the colonies and France, too. Well connected with the top levels, the top tiers of power, all of which were, of course, Freemasons and members of the Hellfire Club, which he soon became a member of himself. But you see how this works, guys? It's always been this way. This corrupt system that we now know is in place, at least all of us who actually pay attention, we know that that's how it works now, right? Clinton said it in his day. I knew if I wanted to climb the ladder of success in the political world, I needed to befriend the right people. And who were those right people? The same ones that were the right people back then in Franklinstein's day. Same people as today. Big money. Big money. What's so sad, though, is that's not going places. It's only going places if you have the wrong perspective on life. But that's not going places. And that's one of the saddest things about our world today, isn't it? People gauge if you're a good person or not by your financial status, and if you're part of high society, if you've accomplished something and climbed the ladder of success in the political world or in academia or the media, you get some big prestigious job. Only then are you a somebody. Otherwise, you're a nobody. It doesn't matter what your character is, how decent of a person you are. If you're decent, if you're moral, you have scruples. You can't stand and expose lies. No. People don't look at that anymore. Doesn't mean a farrigan thing to 99.9% of the population. And I'll argue that's really the reason our world is screwed up. It's not because of corrupt politicians. Politicians have always been corrupt. Always. Oh yeah, there's been a few exceptions here and there, lower on the totem pole, but no, politicians, virtually without exception, especially at the higher levels, have always been corrupt. The only reason why society was not as corrupt in, years past as it is now is because the population itself was not corrupted. And so they had to be on their best behavior and only engage in smaller scale scams and behind closed doors. Today, though, because the general population has been so thoroughly corrupted just like they are, nobody notices, Nobody cares. So they can, and in fact do, engage in their criminal activities much more out in the open. But they get away with it because the thin veneer that they spread over their lies is enough to fool the average dumbed-down idiot who can't see through that thin veneer anymore. But that is, in fact, why things have gotten so bad. It was always desired to get them at this point, but they couldn't do it as long as the general public had somewhat of an awareness and, scruples enough and concern enough that they knew they couldn't get away with this crap years back. They're getting so bold now, though, once again, because they see that the general population has been successfully dumbed down, both intellectually and morally and otherwise. Now they know that they can get away with it, and that's why they're getting away with it. So the problem, it's not our politicians, guys. It's not. The corruption that we see are all around us in this world is because of the degradation of the general population. I mean, it is the politicians. Yes, it's their corruption. But that's really not the reason why the world's so frigged up. It would have been frigged up like this a long time ago. Except that the public was scrupled and more intelligent. That is the only reason why. Otherwise, again, we would have been in this mess from the word go. We've been run by the same criminal scum from the word go, but they couldn't move too fast, too far, with the general population being much more scrupled and much more intelligent. That's why, very early on, the Rockefelders, the Rockefellers, hijacked education. They made sure that right from the start, as the radio was invented and then later the TV, they made sure that they had that avenue completely controlled and used it to the max to their advantage. Mass media, wow, what a powerful weapon in their arsenal. They made sure that there was no competition with them for control over that. And it's paid off handsomely for them, hasn't it? Look how dumbed down people are. This is a tyrant's dream, folks. And that is the only reason why things have gotten so bad as they are. Yes, it's because of the corrupt politicians, but they were always that way. They didn't do this years ago because they couldn't. So what's the real problem, once again, in our society? It's the public. It's the general public. Their phenomenal ignorance and repulsive lack of scruples, of decency, lack of a conscience. Anyway, back to our notes here. Anyway, Franklin returned to Philadelphia in 1726, and then by 1728, 2 years later, he had set up a printing house in partnership with Hugh Meredith just the following year, and became the publisher of a newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette. Now he was off and running. He got the backing he needed. He got this, partnership thing going. And quite obviously, again, guys, it was always his intent to use this newspaper as a means of propaganda. He mingled with the elites. He had no scruples, just like them. He got his backing, and he promised, I already know how to run a printing press, and I've already had some experience at manipulating people with propaganda, so I can be used as a powerful tool. Yes. You can see their eyes gleaming. And we have just the man we're going to send your way. We're going to send you back with these few shekels, help you get set up with your publishing house, and then once you're established, we're going to send a man over your way. He's going to be really good. He's a good writer. So make sure you broadly circulate his writings, and you two are going to, you're going to go places. Yes, I can see this happening. We can really pull it off now. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The things that go on behind the scenes that you never read about in the textbooks for obvious reasons. Anyway, in this paper, Franklin gave a forum, for public agitation about a variety of social reforms and initiatives through printed essays and observations. So he was allowing the public to participate, but of course, he would only print stuff that was in line with ideas that him and his brotherhood wanted to be, propagated, right? Popularizing sleazy ideas to make it out like it was in the public's interest. He was already fomenting revolutionary sentiments through this paper very early on. Or at least, the spirit of rebellion, This was very early now. This is, the early 1730s when this thing was up and fully running. Aberrant liberal, quote, thinking, right? Interestingly, in 1729, he wrote a modest inquiry into the nature and necessity of a paper currency, and was later asked to print Pennsylvania's paper currency. The state of Pennsylvania asked him, who do you suppose was running the state of Pennsylvania, and why would they ask him specifically to print it, right? Isn't that interesting? But he was all for paper/fiat currency. You can see who he was hobnobbing with, right? And understand, even though I said he was printing, revolutionary spirit type articles, this is way before the revolutionary period. This was not in the minds of the general public, right? It's not even foreseeable. They were good buddies with the British, at this time. But the Masonic Brotherhood already had this in mind. They had that in mind before the colonists even come over here, right? That's what Francis Bacon had laid out. They already had this in mind. So very early on, in the late 1720s, early 1730s, already he's not encouraging rising up against Britain, no. But he is encouraging the spirit of dissent, right? Discontent with government policies in general. Already breeding that in people's minds through propaganda and bending people toward, whatever Freemasonry wanted them to be bent toward. That's what the media always does, right? It formulates your opinions under the guise of informing you of, current events. That's what he was all about. He was working with Freemasonry already at this early stage. Well, it wasn't long before Franklin was officially initiated into St. John's Lodge of Philadelphia in 1731. Again, guys, without question, he was already involved with this fraternity before that time. But nevertheless, by 1731, he was officially initiated into the local lodge there. In that same year, he had ushered into print the first Freemasonic book to be published in America. Oh, what a claim to fame, huh? He published the very first Masonic work in all of the colonies. It was an edition of Anderson's Constitutions. And do you remember how in a previous video I pointed out that the U.S. Constitution itself was later largely based around the Masonic constitutions, right? It was Franklin that published those Masonic constitutions that the U.S. Constitution, again, was based upon. In just 3 years after his Masonic initiation, Franklin's brother, or brother Masons, I should say, elected him to the position of Grand Master of all of Pennsylvania in just 3 years' time. Oh, he moved up the ranks pretty quickly, didn't he? He proved himself to be loyal and trustworthy to have such a position assigned to him. Starting later on in 1750, Franklin began traveling often, mostly to England, but France as well, and spent much of the next 2 decades living abroad. What do you suppose he was up to there? Or better yet, what do you suppose Freemasonry was up to, having him travel abroad? Was he helping to set the stage for the upcoming American Revolution, and probably the French Revolution as well? In 1756, Franklin was inducted into the Royal Society, a completely Masonic creation, which was, formulated 100 years earlier for the purpose of what? Remember? To control the scientific establishment, to make sure that no new discovery, that no new invention would make it out to the public without their approval, that they would monopolize all scientific inventions and discoveries to their advantage and keep certain important things secret to themselves so they would have an edge over everyone else, right? That's what the whole freaking thing was established for. And here he was, inducted into that in 1756. He's credited with the one who, discovered electricity, right? Yeah, they had their hand on that lever right from the word go, didn't they? He, quote, discovered it as a Mason, right? He was inducted, as the story goes, into the Royal Society because for that very reason, because he, quote, discovered that lightning was electricity and could be tapped into and used as a power source, But did he really discover it, though? Or was it already known about and they gave it to him? That would be his little claim to fame, right? I guarantee you that's what it was, folks. So many people have been put on pedestals that weren't worthy of being put up on pedestals. Look at Einstein. If you've ever examined that guy and his background and the fact that none of his ideas were original, but he in fact stole them from a French scientist, Poincaré, at least 2.5 decades before he started coming out with his, relativity theory and whatnot. It was all stolen. None of it was original to himself. In fact, he didn't really even understand it. He just plagiarized it. When he was challenged to debates, he turned every one of them down because he didn't want to be publicly embarrassed, not being able to enter into a discussion with people who actually knew what they were talking about. He didn't. He even later made a remark. I'll do a video on him sometime, but if you're not familiar with it, but he even talked at one point how he admitted that he wasn't deserving of all the fanfare that he got, and he was kind of intimidated by it. Yeah, because again, he didn't have a real understanding of science that, he was professed to have had. Total scam artist. He was given that position. There's even been modern physicists who have admitted that Einstein isn't worthy of all the fanfare, but they still continue to push him because he serves as a good mascot for the physics world. The public has accepted him, so that's why they push him, not because because he's really worthy of it. There have been prominent scientists over the years who have actually said that. But like I said, I'll get into that at a future time. At any rate, during the next 20 years, as I said, he not only began, traveling abroad, but he began participating in meetings and ceremonies at lodges both in England, Scotland, and Ireland as well, and on occasion going over to France. Look at that, guys. Scotland especially, right? A real major epicenter for Jewish supremacist activities, and had been for centuries prior to that. The headquarters of the now defunct, yet not so defunct Knights Templar. That's where they really had their stronghold, right? And even though they don't exist as the Knights Templar anymore, their inheritors certainly continue to exist. And it's still a major haven for Judeo's secret societies. It has long been that way. So here he was traveling back and forth. Oh, to have been a fly on the wall for the meetings that he was in attendance at during that period. You can just imagine. For that matter, to be a fly on the wall today when they have their little private meetings. But you almost don't even have to do that, because once you understand their modus operandi and you see how their events play out after one of their meetings, you can already tell what they've talked about, right? Just by looking at the policies that were implemented after their little meetings. Oh, yeah. You don't even have to be a fly. Nevertheless, though, wouldn't it be interesting to hear them in their own words scheming the way they do? How about, what obviously goes on at Bohemian Grove, what goes on at the private sessions of the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. All of these are nothing but Judeo-elitist think tanks that plan their plans for, for the future of, for the world, They make their plans and everyone is caught up in it, whether they like it or not. And many people are duped into thinking that the garbage they're caught up in is actually in their interest. Oh, no, it's not. It's never been in your interest. Always and only in theirs. Anyway, I've noticed in the comments, somebody made a remark in my last video about, I don't think that the narrative is that controlled. It is that controlled. It is. It absolutely is. And to think that it's not that controlled, you're kidding yourself. And you're setting yourself up for their deception. You have to be constantly on the alert, constantly on guard. These scoundrels are way ahead of the game. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to give them credit like they're super geniuses. It doesn't take a super genius to do what they do. It just takes a lack of conscience. But it just so happens that they do have a lot of very intelligent people working for and with them. But that's not even, again, what's required. When you don't have a conscience, that's all that's needed. And most of the people they recruit for their little schemes are just that, people that don't have a conscience. They don't need intelligence as long as they're taking orders from those who employ others that do have intelligence. That's all that matters. Most of the people who work for them are mindless idiots. Just look at the people that occupy the Oval Office. But don't ever think for one moment that they don't have complete control over the narrative. They do. at the highest levels. They absolutely do. That's the same argument people use who defend Trump, right? Oh, come on now. Trump's a good man. Are you freaking kidding me? You really think that they're going to let somebody in? I mean, once you look at the guy's past, the things he's done, the things he's said, obviously he's one of them. But without even having to do that, do you really think that they're going to let someone in power when they control the entire freaking thing? You really think they're going to let someone in power that is even remotely, possibly someone that could oppose them? They're never going to allow that. Ever. They've never allowed it before when things weren't so bad. Now that things are getting so outrageously, obviously corrupt for those who are even mildly conscious, you really think they're going to take a risk of letting someone get in there that could turn everything upside down? And that's my argument with Hitler too, right? Do you really think at that key moment when taking down Germany was their top priority and they already had complete control over, the country as it was with during the 1920s, right? The Weimar Republic, they already had control over it. But they didn't have control over the German people themselves. They had control over the government, but the German people were still independently minded. They had to change that. They had to break them. But they had to do it in such a way that it would look like, it wasn't planned. It was just the way it played out in the wake of the war. Things went belly up and a corrupt leader got in there. It was their corrupt leader. Since they had such complete control over the political system, over the economy, you think it just blows my mind, man. How gullible can you be to think that they're going to actually allow somebody? They pop leaders off constantly that so much as look at them funny all the time and always have throughout history, right? You really think in that country where they already had complete control over its economy and over its government that they're going to allow somebody that wasn't already in their pocket? Before you even look into the problems with the guy, again, I have to absolutely marvel. Absolutely marvel. And then, you know what I get, right? Some of you have probably seen the comments. I get these real nasty, hateful comments made to me. The same kind of comments I've gotten from Christians over the years that are supposed to be filled with the love of Jesus. And yet they are some of the most wretched, absolutely demonic people I've ever met in my entire life, especially the Christian identity type. They're demonic, folks. Even if you don't believe in the demonic realm, they're demonic anyway. You know what I'm saying, right? They meet the definition of what a demonic person is supposed to be. They're pure fucking evil. Not all Christians, no. But the worst people I've ever dealt with, personally, haven't even been Jews. It's been Judaic Christians. And even though they're not Jews, they're Judaic. They're Zionists. These people who believe in the Bible, they can claim to be anti-Zionist all they want, but when they act like Zionists with the same bigotry, the same hatred, the same condemnation, the same spirit of lust for your blood on their lips. And that's how a lot of the Hitler supporters are too. Not all of them by any means, no. But just look at some of the comments I've gotten, guys. These people aren't, compassionate individuals. I don't care what your message is, who it is that you have made into your hero. If you can't be a decent human being about it, stay the hell away from me. I don't want anything to do with you. You think I'm going to enter into a debate with you? Like I said, I don't even get into that anymore anyway. I'm done with that. My days of debating are over. I hate how it, I hate the insincerity of most of the people I've ever debated. They have not been sincere truth seekers. They have a sleazy agenda that they're going to stick by because that's how they've made their living. The money has flowed in for them with that. They've sold some books, whatever, or they just found a close circle of friends now that they like. And so they're going to stick with it, just like religious people do, right? They like that religious social club. even if they're not making a living off of it. That's where they feel comfortable. And so they're not going to change their mind. They're totally disingenuous. And that's why they get angry. I'm going to show you. It's not a matter of what is right. To them, it's a matter of who is right, or at least creating the perception of who is right, right? That's all they're concerned about. Stay the hell away from me. You're not even human. You're a freaking animal. When you have that anger in you, I have anger in me too, but it's the right kind of anger. Anger over people that are filled with vile hatred. But you know what? I don't even hate you people personally. I hate what you stand for. I hate your attitude. I hate your disposition. And so I stay the hell away from people like you because you're scum of the earth. You can't handle the truth. You can't handle when your lie is attacked or your hero is attacked. So you get all irate, and you want to attack the person that's upsetting your little world. Grow up. Grow up. You expose yourself as a phony just by your little attitude. Do I get upset with you? Do I name call and attack you? No, I just present what I found. If you can't handle it, get the hell out of my face. Unsubscribe and don't bother me anymore. I don't want your kind anywhere near me. Okay? What I do is for those who are interested in the truth. I happen to have been born with an inquisitive mind. Something I don't even have control over. I have an insatiable desire to dig and to get answers. And from there, I have an insatiable desire to share what I found. If you don't like it, that's not my problem. If it upsets you, that's not my problem. It's yours. Go somewhere else and deal with it. I don't give a crap that you don't like it. Okay? Another reason I have no desire to debate is because I've already done so when I've presented my case. The debate's over. It's already been won. Go look at the information I provided. If you think there's anything to defend there regarding Mr. Hitler, or for that matter, Mr. Henry Ford, in the wake of the horrific things those SOBs have done, if you think they're defensible, then you're a scumbag just like they are. How do you like them apples? Don't come crybabying on my channel, especially on my YouTube channel, you little sleazebags. They have to take a Hitler debate to my YouTube channel where I'm not even addressing it. That's not the place for that, for obvious reasons, right? Again, look how sleazy some people are, and they call themselves truthers. Genuine truthers are people who not only love the truth and can handle finding out that things they thought were truth weren't. Oh, I've had to do that many times. I've had to change my opinion when I found out, new information. Genuine truthers, though, are not only just concerned with things that are true. Genuine truthers are compassionate people. And when I see truthers that are devoid of that very characteristic, that very trait, you might as well be a hardcore Zio Jew yourself. In fact, maybe you are. Maybe you are. You might as well be a Zio Christian anyways, if nothing else. Because they have that same, for the most part, that same vengeful, angry, hateful, despicable disposition. You're not a truther if you don't have a heart. So stop pretending. We see through your little thin veil, okay? And it's not working. Get lost. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on that tangent. Well, guys, actually, we've reached our hour mark. I'm going to go just a little bit over, though, because there's a few more points I wanted to cover. I don't want to stop here in the middle of a thought. Franklin used his position as a high-level Mason, as you might guess, to raise awareness of issues that were facing the colonies, or so we're told, anyway. Well, I mean, he did, but not in the way that, the history books portray it. he would take issues that were going on and manipulate people, like our media does today, right? Manipulate them in a direction that was in line with his brother Masons, not what was in line with the interests of the general population. This crap was going on way back then. Of course. It's not something that came about in, the past 50 or 60 years or even 100 years, like most people think, oh, our media got corrupt, so many decades ago. No. It got more corrupt. Oh, yes. But it was always corrupt. Always. Started out that way. In 1776, Franklin was sent to France as ambassador of the United States. Oh, look how high up the ladder he had climbed by then. And how did he do it? Again, his Masonic connections. Shortly after his arrival in France, he became master of the most celebrated and powerful lodge in Paris, the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, which was also to include such luminaries as John Paul Jones, first initiated in Scotland in 1770, and Voltaire, interestingly enough. There, Franklin had met many of France's most powerful political and military leaders. Oh, you can just imagine the finagling that was going on there, right? The scheming. He wasted no time using his position to win favor for the cause of the American Revolution. Shortly after this time, lots of money, and I do mean lots of money, and munitions flowed from France into the American colonies. Isn't that interesting? Because just prior to this, they were buddying up with England to fight the French Indian War, right? Now, all of a sudden, not too long later, it's the reverse of that. How did such a transition take place? So quickly, too, right? How did today's enemy become tomorrow's friend and vice versa in such a short time? Because of people like Franklin and the high-level Masons that he was working with that ran these respective governments. That's how. In the meantime, Franklin was also using sex to win friends and influence people, again, in France and England and, other countries that he was going back and forth with, also here in the, in the colonies. Engaging in multiple affairs with women in high places in Paris, probably men as well, but that wasn't talked about, back then, right? But you can bet that was going on. All kinds of sleazy stuff was going on at the Hellfire Club meetings. He did the same thing, as it turns out, when he moved for a time to London, of course, in 1754. He worked out arms deals for weapons that later would be used on the British themselves. And yet there he was working out arms deals with the Brits. How could this have been possible? Again, because he was a Mason. One member of the House of Lords who gave him a warm welcoming was Sir Francis Dashwood, Chancellor of the Exchequer, a member of Parliament, and, of course, a Freemason, as well as a member of the Hellfire Club, as was Franklin. In fact, Dashwood is the one who started the Hellfire Club in the first place, along with Charles Radcliffe and the Duke of Wharton. In fact, Dashwood's home, which is where Franklin would stay, when he would go to England. Well, Franklin also had his own place later, but initially he would stay at Dashwood's estate, and Dashwood's estate was located right above where the Hellfire Club compound, if you will, was dug into the white cliffs there, the chalk cliffs. In fact, there was a tunnel dug from his house all the way down into those subterranean levels, into those chambers where all kinds of horrific, evil ceremonies were performed, rituals, orgies, you name it, guys. Human sacrifice, pedophilia, necrophilia, just like what goes on at Bohemian Grove today, right? That was the Bohemian Grove of the day. Oh, the dark, evil stuff that went on there. Anyway. All right, guys, I will stop there. We should finish this up in the next video. So thanks for joining me, guys. We'll catch you then. Take care. All right, guys, welcome to part 2 of Ben Franklinstein. We were talking about, Franklin spending a lot of time in England in the last video. It turns out that at Dashwood's West Whitcomb home, where Franklin had frequented, right? And where a portrait of Ben Franklin is proudly hung on a wall of one of the drawing rooms, there was found a collection of paintings that amount to 18th century pornography. This place was obviously the site of many an orgy, undoubtedly the reason why Franklin referred to it as paradise, he said. Does any of this sound familiar? The Hellfire Caves, of course, as I mentioned in the last video, were where Franklin, Dashwood, and indeed all of the rest of their buddies really whooped it up beneath this mansion. Franklin once wrote of how he had been below ground at West Whitcomb, obviously alluding to the caves. It was a little play on words, below ground. He wanted people to interpret that as his place of refuge, to get away from the hustle and bustle of life. But he was literally referring to below ground. That's where they hung out, their little underground haven, where they would engage in all kinds of heinous practices. The Hellfire clubbers would take whole works at a time for their lengthy, secretive cave retreats. Whole weeks at a time, I'm sorry. They would take whole weeks. They would go there for weeks on end for these long excursions. Again, not much unlike the Bohemian Grove Fest, which goes for 2 weeks every year in July, right? 2-week-long session. In Franklin's day, the same thing. Weeks at a time, sometimes more than 2 weeks. This, again, the fact that they met underground in these secret havens, underground where their activities would be completely soundproof. Not only could you not hear what they were discussing, but you couldn't hear if there were any screams or crying of their victims either. Amongst other things, it was here where, they got involved in not only their orgiastic practices and incredibly evil conspiratorial plannings, but also they performed their occult rituals, which involved clearly human sacrifice. It's now no secret that when Ben Franklin's London house was excavated back in the 90s, human skeletons were found buried beneath the basement floor. Well over 1,000 of them. it's now claimed that, they were cadavers used for autopsies and other scientific research. Yeah, right. Anyway, be that as it may, let's suppose that that was the case with some of those bodies. It was totally illegal at the time. And one would have to wonder how these bodies were obtained, many of which were children, and some of them were even fetuses. Do you really think that all of them were just for autopsy purposes? We know all kinds of evil deeds were conducted under the Dashwood Manor, right? Yeah. 1,000 bodies, including children and even fetuses. Again, perhaps some of them, were used for autopsies or whatever, or just for scientific purposes. Maybe he did hang around with some scientifically minded people. He was scientifically minded himself. But guys, I would bet that upwards of 90% of them, if not more, 95%, were victims of their ritual murders in the Hellfire Caves. Franklin's brother, James, by his own admission, was a member of an American version of the Hellfire Club. So, there you go. It ran deep in the Franklin bloodline. Anyway, on November 9th of 1775, a special committee, the Committee of Congress for Secret Correspondence, was appointed to establish a network of contacts among, quote, our friends abroad. This committee consisted of Robert Morris, John Jay, Benjamin Harrison, John Dickinson, and of course Benjamin Franklin, all of which were, can you guess, Freemasons. It was to operate extensively throughout Freemasonic channels, naturally, and to lead to the creation of an elaborate spy network. At the same time, it was to overlap a British spy network, which ran parallel to it and also operated through Freemasonic channels. So this was to ensure that they would have control on both sides. Even though the bulk of the fighters in the upcoming war would not know about this, they didn't need to, as long as those at the top in commanding positions in both militaries would be in on the gag, you see. Pretty obvious what this was designed for. Both networks were to be based primarily in Paris, which became the epicenter for a vast web of espionage, intrigue, and shifting allegiances, at least as far as nations went, right? But there was never any shift in allegiance as far as Freemasonry was concerned. Their allegiance was always with them. So when Franklin was called a double or a triple agent, that's true only in the sense of what nation he was allegedly loyal to at any given time. He was never loyal to any of them, though. And his allegiance never changed when it came to Freemasonry and its spin-off, the Hellfire Club. He never switched allegiance there, did he? Prior to this time, from the 1750s until 1775, Franklin was Deputy Postmaster General for the American colonies. That, my friends, was literally a spy master position. You were privy to all information. That's what the Postmaster General was, right? You had all kinds of information coming through you that you could easily glance at and share with your brethren in the little fraternity. And that's what he did in that capacity. That's how we got that position, right? That's how they found out, for example, who a lot of the Tories were that were not supportive of the revolution, so that Sam Adams and John Hancock could know who to terrorize, whose homes to burn down, who to tar and feather, on and on it goes. It was during this time that Franklin had become particularly friendly with what was supposed to be his opposition, the joint British Postmasters General, the Earl of Sandwich, and, you guessed it, Sir Francis Dashwood. They were supposed to be his opponents in this whole thing, right? And yet he was best buddies with them. Isn't that interesting? Franklin and Dashwood, and guys, let me just pause for a moment to bring this into a more modern context, right? This is what went on then. At the highest levels, he was buddies with the people that were calling the shots in the war, right? He was buddies with them. They were planning the thing on their end. He was planning the thing on his end over here. They were conspiring together so that it all played out in accordance with Freemasonry. So all the people who fought in the war at the lower levels, who didn't know about what was going on, they were their suckers, their minions, right? Let's pick this fight between people in both our camps. Their loyalties were not with either one of their countries, right? It was with Freemasonry. Let's pin our people against your people. Yeah, let's work together. We'll have them kill each other off, and we'll stage this whole thing, make it look legitimate. We'll pump it up with propaganda, and then we can take down, ultimately take down the British crown. It didn't happen right away, but it certainly diminished the crown's power, right? It was a step in that direction. And then, not long after that, we're going to stage the same thing in France with our Masonic buddies over in France. Oh, my God, man. But let me point out, just like then, where those at the top were buddies, they weren't real enemies. They weren't really fighting against each other, were they? Of course not. They were lovers down in the catacomb, or the caverns, the man-made caverns dug out in the solid rock. They were buddies down there, engaging in their little orgies together. They weren't enemies, but they turned the American soldiers and the British soldiers into enemies of each other, right? For no reason. So what do you think was going on in World War I and World War II? And indeed every other war in between, and every war thereafter. Guys, and every war before that, for that matter. Remember, war is a racket. Did you ever read that? Well, it's absolutely true. War is a racket. War is a fraud. Those at the top never were really fighting against each other. It's just their populations that they pinned against each other. That clearly was going on here in the Revolutionary War period. And it's gone on ever since. It's gone on ever since. All we have been fed is the illusion that this political leader is at odds with that political leader, and they can't resolve their issues, and that's why we go to war. They have different conflicting political ideologies that can't be resolved, blah, 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 blah. It's all BS. Always has been. Always. Anyway, Franklin and Dashwood, both very close friends, held these positions as the Postmaster General, right? On both sides of the Atlantic for the entire duration of the American War for Independence. Isn't that interesting? They were literally the spy masters on both sides of the conflict, right? They were the CIA and the MI6 of that era. And they're buddies. They're sharing their intelligence back and forth to make sure everything was manipulated in favor of the interests of the Brotherhood, all in conformance with Francis Bacon's little scheme that he had come up with, right? Well, I mean, he didn't invent the idea of world government, but he laid it out in detail how it could actually come about in the very near future. We can finally bring this about. We've wanted it for generations and generations, right? We can now do it, and here's how. And here it was playing out. And look at these sleazy, monstrous key players here orchestrating the whole thing. It's incredible. In his dual role of spy master for the Committee of Congress for Secret Correspondence and colonial ambassador to France, Franklin established his center of operations right over in Paris there. He was accompanied there by two other appointees of the Congressional Committee for Secret Correspondence, Silas Deane and Arthur Lee. Lee's brother was based in London. So too was Franklin's sister, Jane, who was also believed to have been engaged in espionage herself. Yeah, again, it ran deep in the Franklin blood. She had long been good friends of Admiral Lord Richard Howe, commander of naval operations in the colonial theater. So look at this. Once again, guys, look at the treason, right? Well, treason. They weren't treasonous to their little order. Treasonous to the colonists, and their buddies over in England were treasonous to the British, but yet totally loyal to their Masonic Brotherhood. How these people have been praised and still continue to be praised in the public eye as great heroes and champions of freedom and democracy, true American patriots. They were no such thing. Criminals extraordinaire. Not just because of their political schemings, but again, the crap that went on at things like the Hellfire Club. Oh, wow, man. Wow, wow, wow. And so were you surprised to hear about, the Jeffrey Epstein thing or the Franklin cover-up in more modern times? This is an old game, baby. This has been going on all along. In 1774, Franklin's sister had brought Ben and the Admiral together, ostensibly to play chess. Yeah, right. And they frequently had discussed the colonist grievances as the story goes, right? But we know better. We know other things were being discussed then. He was supposed to be operating in official capacity on behalf of the colonists. Right. You really think that's what he was doing? We've already seen where Franklin lied to the British Parliament, right? Assuring them that, they won't have any objection to the Stamp Act and then later the Tea Act. And he was lying. He had every intent of inciting resistance to those taxes. When he said it at the time, though, he wasn't lying. He knew the colonists wouldn't object to that. But he knew that he was going to create the illusion of objection or create the desire to object, through his buddy's work of intimidation and bribery and coercion and terrorism and, blah, 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 right? So in that sense, he was lying. At the time, he knew the colonists as a whole didn't object, but he knew they would down the line through, amongst the other things I mentioned, his propaganda in his own paper, right? And the propaganda he would help disseminate of pain. In 1781, an open letter was published by one Cicero, as he called himself, writing from London, who had accused Howe and his brother of belonging to a faction, quote unquote, meaning Masonry, which had conspired to facilitate the colonists' bid for independence. How do you like that? No wonder he wrote under an alias, Cicero. He didn't want his name known. He wrote anonymously because he was exposing how, he found out that there was this little faction, i.e. Masonry, or, the Hellfire Club, whatever, same thing, which had conspired to facilitate the colonists' bid for independence. And is that what they did? Yeah. They did facilitate the colonists' bid for independence. The colonists had no ambition for that. None. They created it. They facilitated it. Here's what this Cicero wrote, in part anyway. He said, Washington's whole conduct demonstrated a confidence which could arise from nothing short of certain knowledge. Yeah, certain inside knowledge. From whence? From a secret faction. He explicitly accused Admiral Howe of, quote, having secret intrigues with Dr. Franklin. Admiral Howe replied in a newspaper declaring that this Cicero character, quote, is perfectly right as to the fact, though a little deceived in his inferences. Imagine that. So he's admitting, we have been conspiring, but some of his inferences are incorrect. He was implying that we have the best intentions in mind here. Right, sure you do. But did you catch that? He didn't deny it. He knew he was caught, right? At the same time, however, he admitted that he had withheld knowledge of his meetings with Franklin from the Naval High Command, which suggests that he might indeed have had something to hide. Of course. This was treason, right? As far as the general public was concerned. Not in their estimation, of course. They weren't treasonous at all to the ones they really swore an oath of loyalty to, their Masonic Brotherhood. So, we're dealing here with nothing short of a conspiracy, a Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. One of the most important agents for the colonists in England was Dashwood's former friend, fellow MP, Member of Parliament, and associate Hellfire Club member, John Wilkes. Does that name sound familiar? Later, we had Mr. John Wilkes Booth, right? Obviously named after this guy. Wilkes had become, and of course, John Wilkes Booth was a Freemason, so no surprise. Wilkes had become an active Freemason in 1769, and by 1774 was Lord Mayor of London. In this capacity, he was publicly vociferous on behalf of the colonists' cause, or at least that's the public rhetoric, anyway, that they portrayed. But since the late 1760s, he had also been the secret British representative of the Boston-based Sons of Liberty. Yes, another branch of Freemasonry run by Sam Adams and company, right? Which, of course, played such a crucial role in the Tea Party, which itself, again, was as Masonic as you could get, right? Throughout the war, Wilkes was clandestinely raising money for the Continental Army and remitting it to Franklin in Paris. From Paris, it was either passed on to North America or else used to purchase arms and various materials. Oddly enough, a letter of 1777 suggests that although Wilkes's network was penetrated, nothing was ever done about it. There were those who were suspicious of it and had infiltrated it, and yet nothing ever came of it because naturally, you can just guess what happened there, right? Same thing that happens now. You find out some horrible, corrupt secret about the government, and the minute you try to do anything with it, you meet a dead end at every turn. Oh, I can't go any further than that. Oh, I can't go any further than that. Because Masons control everything at the top, back then as today, right? And if you dig too deep or push too much, you wind up at the bottom of a ravine. The British spy network, also run from Paris, was officially under the auspices of William Eden, Lord Auckland, another eminent man whose Masonic history has eluded most investigators, but he was definitely a Mason too. Of course. All people of high positions were Masons. In 1770, he had become Grand Steward of Grand Lodge, but no details exist of when, where, or by whom he was initiated, but clearly he was a Mason. Auckland's network operated, in large part, through sea captains trading between France and North America, including those who carried dispatches between Franklin and Congress. Oh, look at that little interesting arrangement. As late as December 10th, 1777, one of these captains, a man from Maryland named Hinson, reported to Auckland about Franklin that, quote, whenever Great Britain would show a disposition for peace, he would be the first to give up this independence. Apart from his maritime agents, Lord Auckland had agents of peculiar importance in Paris. This one particular one, who was Dr. Edward Bancroft, who was a distinguished naturalist and chemist, undoubtedly also a member of the Royal Society. In fact, he obviously had connection with the Royal Society early on, but he was officially inducted in 1773, before the war, by guess who? His close, or a close friend of Ben Franklin's. Franklin sponsored his nomination as a fellow of the Royal Society. Franklin personally sponsored it. How do you like that? Though Bancroft, or through Bancroft, I should say, the British government was kept appraised not only of the colonists' activities, but also of French plans for entering the war. You could see how he would have the opportunity to skew intelligence in the wrong direction, right? To mislead emissaries of the king, right? Yeah, he was in the perfect position to do that, just like Franklin was misleading Parliament. In theory, at least, Britain could therefore have anticipated and moved to thwart such developments as the French contribution to colonial victory at Yorktown. But with Lord Sandwich as First Lord of the Admiralty, and with Admiral Lord Richard Howe commanding the fleet in North American waters, the Royal Navy displayed the same dilatory conduct as the Army's high command. And why? Because the whole charade was being orchestrated at the highest levels and on both sides, once again, by Freemasonry. You know, again, I was so bored with history, guys, in high school. I hated it. It was just, you know, dry, drab, having to remember names, dates, places. And it just, you know, I loved ancient history. I was fascinated with ancient history. But, you know, more modern history, going back even into the medieval period, I didn't care. It didn't mean anything to me. It was just, you know, who cares who did what then? It has no bearing on me now. I don't really care. Oh, did that change years later when I started putting the pieces together and, you know, figuring out this hidden hand. Now I couldn't get enough of history. And how interesting it would be across the board if it was taught properly. Everybody would be interested. Everybody would want to know, yeah, how did we get to this position? Oh, and would it tell us so much about the current world situation? How we got in this mess? Why we're in this mess? Who put us here? And who keeps us here? Oh, history is very important. You know that old expression, those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it, right? Well, yes. They are condemned to repeat it and will always continue to repeat it because those who manipulate things behind the scenes always see to it that it gets repeated.
This has worked so well for us in the past, let's keep doing it.
And it will continue to work as long as people don't even know history. That's why it gets repeated. That's why those in power are able to repeat it, because people don't know history. They don't know who the real string pullers have always been and what their real aim is. But once you do know that, holy crap, man. Everything they do, you know exactly why they're doing it. You know it's a scam from the word go. And you can see how it's going to be manipulated in their favor by screwing everybody else, right? Before I had ever looked into 9/11 to see that it was the fraud that it was, I already knew it was a scam. I didn't know right away exactly, you know, how it was going to be manipulated. I knew it was them doing it, and it didn't take long for me to see how it fit into the big scheme of the New World Order. Likewise, you know, COVID comes along, the bailout, the housing bubble. It's always them. You know it is before you even look into it, once you know their little game, once you know who the real string pullers are, right? And yet most people, they don't want to hear it. It's much more easy for them to call you a whack job because
everybody else thinks that.
People want to, you know, stay in their little comfort zone, right?
They don't want to be known as a whack job.
And they don't want their little cozy nest to be upset, right? To be disturbed. So much easier to live in that little fantasy world. So yeah. They'll call you crazy, even if they suspect that you might actually be right.
Oh, no, I can't admit that. I can't even admit that to my own self, never mind anyone else.
And they don't want to be called crazy. You know, I think a lot of times that's more the reason than anything else. They don't want to be labeled a nut job. But in reality, you're a nut job for denying what is so very easily proven to be true. We don't live in a paradise. We live in a hellhole run by criminal scoundrels. And denying that is not going to fix the problem. It actually facilitates it. Anyway, in retrospect, it's clear that the intelligence that Bancroft provided was sound. In 1785, Parliament rewarded him by giving him a period of monopoly over the import of a certain vegetable dye used for printing calico, a process which, he had pioneered himself. But nevertheless, the king, who had read all who had, personally read all of the intelligence reports, did not trust him and suspected him of being a double agent for the colonists. So Parliament was buying it. Well, of course, because a good many of them were probably frickin' Masons too. But the king wasn't buying it, and he was right. He suspected him as being a double agent, and he was. What he really was an agent for frickin' Masonry. It didn't matter to him. British, American colonists, it was of no interest. Just like on the American side, right? The ones orchestrating all of this, like Franklin, it didn't matter. The British, the American colonists, his loyalty wasn't with either. It was with Masonry. All else be damned. Just like our politicians today, folks, they don't give a damn. They don't give a damn. That's why our borders are wide open. They don't care. It's not their lives that are getting screwed up. They live a very cozy, cushy life. They're well protected, you see. They're not getting affected, and they don't care that you are. Their loyalties aren't with you, in case you haven't noticed. The British spy network under Lord Auckland continued to penetrate but not exploit that of the colonists. In this process, Sir Francis Dashwood, again as Postmaster General, was of particular importance. Again and again, Dashwood interpreted the colonists' correspondence and then passed them on to Auckland. You can just see how easy it was for them to doctor everything, and you can bet that's exactly what they did. But what's most extraordinary, yet perhaps not so extraordinary, is the fact that during the whole of this time, Dashwood and Franklin appear to have maintained personal contact by their own secret channels of communication. Of course. Yes. Even though, at this time, Franklin wasn't, because that would look too obvious, right? He wasn't spending too much time at Dashwood's place, but there was still a correspondence going back and forth between them. Thus, for example, one of Dashwood's agents, a certain John Norris, reported in a letter dated June 3rd of 1778, quote, did intercept this day a heliograph intelligence from Dr. Franklin in Paris to Whitcomb. There you go. There's your correspondence, your little secret correspondence. At least one commentator has concluded from this that Franklin was actually a British agent, but that's not really true, of course. Whether this commentator recognized that or not and was lying, it doesn't matter. For those not in the know, there are some historians that actually don't have a clue. They don't know about this hidden hand of Freemasonry. And so that when they see documents like that, they'll think, oh, he was a double agent. But at the same time, there are those at the top who do know and just don't want you to know. Yeah, they'll play the game. Oh, yeah, double agent. Oh, imagine that. Wow, what was going on with that? He was a traitor, And yet all the while, you'll never figure out the real reason why he was doing what he was doing. Franklin only worked for one side and was very loyal to that one side. And that one side was not the colonists or Britain or France. It was, again, Freemasonry. And key people in key positions in France and England were playing the same game. No loyalties to their respective countries, but total loyalties to Freemasonry. I hate to sound redundant, I keep repeating that point, but I have to, guys, because it's so pertinent. And once you see that was going on then, well, my God, translate that over now into modern times. It's the same frickin' thing. So you can look over at the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Both of those monkeys that sit enthroned are Zio-Jew pigs, folks. How do people not see this? You really think they're enemies? They're probably meeting in today's equivalent of Hellfire Club caverns and having their little orgies together, patting each other on the back, while each other's peoples are killing each other off and laughing all the way to the bank. It's nothing new. Nothing new under the sun. And yet you've got people siding. Oh, Putin's the right guy. No, the Ukraine is the one we need to support. Come on, man. And I'm talking, quote, truthers that are doing this, right? You can understand the general public having their heads up their hind parts. But truthers, quote, unquote, are falling for this. Actually picking sides. Oh, man. The Zios laugh at people like that. You think you're so smart. You think you got us figured out? You're playing right into our hand. It's like on election day, right? They don't care if you hate the Democratic candidate, as long as you love the Republican one, or vice versa. They don't care. Either way, they win. Anyway, in 1775, Thomas Paine, our little buddy, whom Franklin had sent to America to work on the Pennsylvania magazine for war propaganda purposes, of course, argued that America should not just revolt against British taxation, but should also demand independence. Franklin returned to Philadelphia and printed Paine's Common Sense, right? A call for independence in January of 1776. So it wasn't just about getting rid of the tax. This was always what they were after. Independence. Break the back of the king. From there, we can work on him some more and finish him off. But right now, finish off all the royals, right? But for now, our first goal is independence, to establish the U.S. as the launching pad for world government, right? To create an empire, just like Washington said. What we have established here is an empire in its infancy. Yeah, that's what it was all about. Franklin, in doing this, had thus brought to America a readiness for independence through Paine's writings, right, by publishing and circulating his book, so that the Declaration of Independence was a natural next step. Thomas Jefferson, of course, is referred to as the writer of the Declaration of Independence, which, as we've seen, it's not actually even the case, but nevertheless, it was Thomas Paine, right? But, this whole thing was an outgrowth of, his Masonic movement. We already talked about Thomas Jefferson having Masonic connections. He had to be a Mason. You don't have to have your name in the official roster of a Masonic lodge. And especially back then, they covered a lot of that up, right? And if not at the time, they've covered it up since. There's a lot of key people like that. They don't want anyone knowing we're Masons. And yet, you discover later on that Masonic lodges are named after people like that. Roger Williams, for example, it's hard to nail down that he was a Mason, but you look at his modus operandi, he had to be, right? He was certainly a crypto. And he was definitely in league with Freemasons. If he wasn't actually a Mason, what does it matter? He was in league with them. But it turns out that there's a Masonic lodge just outside of Providence, Rhode Island, named after him. The Roger Williams Lodge. And by the way, did you know that it was Franklin who had convinced fellow Masons Jefferson and Adams that they should use a Masonic seal that had come into his possession for the Great Seal of the United States, which is what's depicted again on the back of the $1 bill. It was Franklin that suggested that. It didn't make its way onto the back of the $1 bill, though, until 1935, right? Wallace, the high-level Mason, is the one that suggested that. But it was, always had been, the official, quote, seal of the United States. It's a Masonic frickin' seal. All the symbols on it are Freemasonic to the core, right? And yes, it was Franklin. You know, even though Jefferson and John Adams, were Freemasons, and they did play their role in this whole thing. And even though I don't fully trust them, nevertheless, guys, we got to be mindful of the fact that they obviously were murdered. They both died on the same day, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, right? That is cause for concern. You've got to wonder what the hell was up with that. So, I mean, this happens, right? People that are in their service later in life, have a turnaround or become a problem or start objecting. And so now, we got to get rid of them. I'm sorry. The chances of both of them dying on the same day on the 100th anniversary, something was going on there. I don't know if we'll ever be able to figure that out, but that reeks of murder to me. Anyway, but can you believe how profoundly different real history is from what we've been sold in the textbooks, especially this part of history? So many Americans have such endearing views of the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers. It's almost, heresy to speak against them, right?
You're not a patriot. You don't love this country.
Oh, shut up. Again, people that can't distinguish between your country and your government, there's a very big difference. True patriotism is loyalty to your country, not to your government. Suckerdom is loyalty to your government. Anyway, the Battle of Bunker Hill proved to be the bloodiest battle of the entire Revolutionary War. After it took place, some colonists, like John Adams, became suspicious of Franklin because of his close relationship, with top British officials. At least that's the official story. We always have to wonder if he really was, if he was faking it, But like I said, there is some chance that we could salvage John Adams. Certainly, toward the end of his life anyway. The fact that, it seems like clearly he was murdered along with Thomas Jefferson. But anyway, he was rightly suspected as being a possible double agent, even in his day. So Franklin had to pull a fast one to diminish such suspicions. Thus, he wrote a letter to his friend in London, William Sirhan, the king's official printer and a member of Parliament, undoubtedly a brother Mason as well. Franklin never intended to mail this letter, though. It was only intended to be found and read by his detractors so as to make it look like he was a loyalist to the rebel cause. It stated, quote, "Mr. Sirhan, you are a member of Parliament and one of the majority that has doomed my country to destruction. You have begun to burn our towns and murder our people. See how he's acting like he's such a loyalist here. Look upon your hands, he said. They are stained with the blood of your relations. You and I were long friends. You are now my enemy, and I am yours. Signed, B. Franklin. Oh, baloney, man. This is such frickin' propaganda. Just face saving. That's all it was for public consumption. Conveniently, it didn't get mailed so it could be found. Kind of like that magic passport that survived the massive explosion that blew up the entire plane,
or whatever the hell it was,
that hit the North Tower on 9/11, right? The whole plane was completely engulfed in flames. It went into the building, the whole thing. And upon impact, boom, this massive explosion. And yet we're supposed to believe that a piece of paper survived that and was found blocks away, totally unscathed. Right. Yeah. How convenient, right? Again, just like this garbage here. How convenient. The letter didn't get mailed and it just happened to get found. What a joke. Sure enough, though, this letter was found and had the desired effect, driving away suspicions with most people anyway, and winning Franklin back undeserved trust. Franklin, as you might guess, never ceased to be friends with Sirhan. Unbelievable. In fact, a decade after the war, Franklin still signed his letters to Sirhan thusly: I am ever, my dear friend, yours most affectionately. Oh, and this is the guy he supposedly called his enemy? I am ever, my dear friend, yours most affectionately. And oh, I bet he was his most affectionately. Literally, as well as figuratively. Wow, wow, wow. How you liking Ben Franklin now, folks? Well, no surprise. In his book, The Secret Destiny of America, 33rd degree Mason Manly P. Hall had this to say about his hero, Mr. Ben Franklin. He said, any account of secret societies in America would have to take would have to include tribute to the man who has been called America's first gentleman. Gentleman? Really? Mr. 1,000 bodies in his basement? Mr. Hellfire Club? Anyway, historians have never ceased to wonder, he said, at the enormous psychological influence that Franklin exercised in colonial politics. Psychological influence. In other words, his power to deceive, to manipulate. There's your psychological influence. But up to the present day, he said, few indeed are those who have realized the source of his power lay in the secret societies to which he belonged. Notice, plural. And of which he was the appointed spokesman. He was the appointed spokesman of who? The secret societies to which he belonged. Freemasonry, Hellfire Club. And notice how he refers to them as all being in league with each other, right? He spoke for them because they all had the same agenda, of course, as they do today. When Benjamin Franklin went to France, he went on to say, to be honored by the state, he was received too by the Lodge of Perfection, the most famous of all of the French secret orders and his name, written in his own fine hand, is in their record lodge, close to that of the Marquis de Lafayette. Well, look at that. He went there to speak in official capacity,
not only as a representative of the colonies,
which he really wasn't. He didn't represent them. But he went as a Mason to address his brother Masons. That's really what he went there for. Do you see, guys, how if you pay attention, these scoundrels actually boast about their hidden yet not so hidden hand all throughout history. He said Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, which is his little title for
the secret conspiracy for world government.
He spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members, of course, yes. The plan was working out. The new Atlantis was coming into being. Whose new Atlantis? Francis Bacon's. All that Franklin did, and indeed all of his other buddies in Freemasonry working in the, to bring about the American Revolution, was what? The plan. The plan was working out. The new Atlantis was coming into being in accordance with the program laid down by Francis Bacon 150 years earlier. He went on to say the rise of American democracy was necessary to a world program, world government. At the appointed hour, the freedom of man was publicly declared. The freedom of man was publicly declared. It wasn't implemented. It was never implemented. Only the illusion that it was. And the illusion was more convincing in the past, but it was never a reality as far as they were concerned. It was actually about the enslavement of man. That's what this country was founded for. Yeah. Are you feeling free now, America?
Proud to be an American.
Or at least you know you're what? Really? Do you know you're free, America? If that's what you think, you have my sympathies. Because you don't know what the hell you're talking about. You don't know what freedom is, baby. You don't have it, and you never did. You had more of it than you have now, but you never had it. You never had it. All you had was the illusion. We've been a slave all along. Just like, the 13th Amendment, only the illusion of the removal of slavery. No, what they did was enslave us all equally. And as I like to point out, many people miss this, but if you read the 13th Amendment, it only forbids involuntary servitude. But it says nothing against voluntary servitude. And that's exactly what they've suckered us into with applications.
Applications for a social security number. Applications for employment. Applications for this. Applications for that.
You are applying of your own free will, even though you're told if you don't,
you can't get a job. You can't go to school. You can't do this, can't do that.
And when you apply, you're applying to be their slave. You're giving them control over you, and you don't even realize it. And all I have to do is tell you,
proud to be an American.
All they got to do is tell you you're free and take pride in that freedom as they're suckering you and enslaving you. But there you have it, guys, right from the horse's mouth. There is Mr. Manly P. Hall boasting about Ben Franklin and how all that time he was really working for his secret societies. Unreal. Among other things, and in classic American politician style, right, which has been the case all along, Franklin lived a very extravagant lifestyle, and at the expense of others, hardly the exemplary image of the founding fathers that most Americans have, right? That they've been fed. In the book, Crimes and Cover-Ups of American Politics, author Donald Jeffries had this to say, pretty interesting. He said, Franklin was an extravagant personality who spent money on every luxury imaginable, especially when he was in London. His privileged lifestyles came courtesy of the taxpayers, as he tended to charge everything to the people of Pennsylvania. Imagine that. That was actually quoted in the Chicago Tribune, May 6th, 1990. If you pay attention, even mainstream media, they'll never give you the whole picture, but they'll give you reason to question, to doubt. They know most people are never going to go there. They won't read beyond what is in the mainstream media. They'll think, oh, see, they're honest. They told us that there's reasons to question. No, they didn't. They gave you reason to question certain things, but only just so far. You can only step on the first rung of the ladder.
Don't go any higher than that, because that's the realm of the crazy conspiracy nuts.
They don't mind squeaking out just a little here, just a little there. So you get the impression that mainstream is on it, and anything that's worth knowing, they're going to let us know eventually. Right. Sure they are. Anyway, guys, there you have it in a nutshell. Mr. Ben Franklin, scoundrel of all scoundrels, and yet an admired and totally loyal Freemason. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll catch you next video. Take care.